I've always known silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it just means everyone agreed not to say anything aloud. Are you still going to present tomorrow? The question came lightly, in passing from someone 2 levels beneath me. She didn't mean harm. She held a takeaway coffee, stirred it twice, then kept walking. I hadn't heard about a presentation. I opened the internal schedule. There was a full executive session at 9 a.m. Strategic restructuring, leadership realignment, international division review. Every department head was listed, except mine. There was a strange stillness in my stomach. Not pain. Just an absence. Like the moment right after a pulled tooth when the nerve is gone, but your tongue still searches the empty socket. I refreshed the page. Still not there. I opened the archived reports. The Eastbridge contract, my contract, was now filed under Brandon Hartman. There was a footnote about final revisions submitted by Director B. Hartman. He hadn't been in a single negotiation. When I checked my access credentials, everything was labeled pending administrative review. Files I'd created were now read only. Some didn't open at all. My name no longer appeared in revision histories. It wasn't an error. It was precise. By the end of the day, a message blinked on my phone screen. Erin, I think it would be best if you took a short leave. No need to attend tomorrow. Douglas Hartman. No greeting. No signature. No context. Just the sort of message that lets you know a conversation has already happened, one you were never invited into. I didn't respond. I sat there, one hand still on the USB drive. I always carried a habit from when digital files got corrupted more than reputations did. At some point, I remembered a line from an old conversation. My father, pouring scotch into a glass not offered to me, had once said, "You work hard, but you're not the kind people follow. You make others nervous." He hadn't looked up when he said it. No one had corrected him. I had nodded like I agreed, because sometimes agreeing feels safer than defending a truth that no one else seems to recognize. I ran my thumb along the edge of the USB. The metal was slightly worn where my hand had always gripped it. There was nothing left to ask. When your name disappears from the room without anyone noticing it, isn't because they forgot. It's because they planned for it that way. I used to think that if I made myself useful enough, the rest would follow. I volunteered for the accounts no one wanted, regional logistics, compliance backlogs, vendor relations in countries without reliable power grids. I stayed late. I cleaned up decks that weren't mine, fixed decimal errors, merged revisions after midnight. When Brandon needed a forecast model cleaned up for optics, I rewrote it from scratch and left my initials off the version he sent. I never corrected the record. Once, after a quarterly meeting, I overheard someone laugh in the hallway. "She's good at math, but not great at making people comfortable." The tone was casual, familiar, the kind of remark no one feels the need to whisper. My mother used to pause when I talked about work. She'd let the silence linger before changing the subject. "One Thanksgiving, I called to say I wouldn't be flying home. I thought you'd outgrown needing to prove things," she murmured, then hung up before I could reply. I didn't go because the board meeting had been moved to Monday. I'd spent the weekend preparing a pitch for a new Eastbridge rollout. When I submitted the file to Douglas, it was returned hours later, same title, same graphs, but signed Brandon. I didn't mention it. No one did. A recruiter from Halston and Pierce reached out around that time. They offered a seat at their global strategy table. I declined. I owe it to the team here. We're building something real, I'd written. I remember staring at that sentence for a long time before hitting send. In staff meetings, when I offered ideas, they often returned to me days later in different voices. Brandon would summarize what I'd said slowly, as if he'd chewed it down to something more palatable, and the room would nod. "He's learning," Douglas once said. I wanted to believe it was true. I'd told myself that the right people were watching, that integrity didn't require confirmation, that the work would speak. But the work didn't speak. It was spoken over, copied, renamed, and shelved in someone else's drawer. Now, with no calendar, invites, no access credentials, no trace of my initials on what I built, I realized something simple. The only part of me that made it into their story was the silence I allowed. I've always been good at remembering who was in the room and who wasn't, especially when something was being handed out. At last year's appreciation banquet, I stood near the back of the hall, hands folded behind my chair. Douglas raised a glass and read from the printed note in his hand. He named each department head, pausing just long enough for polite applause. I listened for my own name, not out of hope, but habit. It never came. The envelope placed at my seat read, "With gratitude," in embossed navy. Inside was a card printed with the company's mission and a stamped signature. Others whispered over personalized notes, private references. "Thank you for making strategy human again," someone read aloud. I folded my envelope in half and slid it into my coat pocket. When the Eastbridge contract was finalized, a deal I had negotiated through 8 months of late-night calls and red line revisions, the internal memo opened with congratulations to Brandon Hartman and the strategic growth team. Brandon had missed every meeting. He once asked if Eastbridge handled freight. That afternoon he left a thank you note on Amanda's desk. It was on the company's thick linen stationery. She held it up without irony. "I guess I'm part of the vision now." The office birthday card that circulated last April was addressed to the core team behind a historic year. Brandon's name was written at the top, underlined twice. I found the card resting on the copier with a blue pen. I signed my initials on the inside flap, small near the fold, then passed it along. The holiday gift arrived in a matte box with the company logo embossed in silver. Inside was a mug, a bag of tea, and a $10 gift card. No message. I watched Karen pull a slip of paper from hers. "Thank you for keeping the lights on." She read, blinking. Mine contained nothing. I folded the wrapping neatly and stacked it in the break room bin. I remembered the day Douglas hired me. He stood by the glass wall watching the sun hit the skyline. "I need someone who works deeper than the noise," he'd said. I nodded. I thought he meant it. Years later, Brandon stood at a podium, reciting my words to a room that thought they were his, and I sat just outside the door holding a clipboard that no longer bore my name. They didn't forget me. They never intended to remember. I've learned that erasure doesn't always arrive with red ink. Sometimes it comes dressed in applause. The company streamed the internal broadcast at noon. A podium, our company banner, a row of seated executives arranged like an orchestra tuned to one conductor. Douglas stood in the center, his voice calm, rehearsed. "We're proud to announce a new chapter for our international operations. Brandon Hartman will be stepping in as director after months of meaningful behind-the-scenes contributions." He gestured toward a slide charts I had compiled, forecasts I had modeled, outcomes I had translated into 2 languages and 3 currencies. Brandon smiled as his photo appeared beside a list of initiatives I recognized, every one of them mine. Someone clapped, a few followed, others stayed still. I watched without sound. The playback bar moved forward whether I blinked or not. Later at my desk I refreshed the company directory. My name no longer appeared under the international division. The key contributor section was blank. Brandon's profile listed 2 years of experience. He'd been there 10 months. An email arrived at 3:42 p.m. from Deborah Wells. Please arrange to transfer all documentation within 48 hours. Effective immediately, you will not participate in ongoing operational meetings. There was no greeting, no context, just a line break before her signature. I stared at the punctuation a period after the word immediately like it had always been inevitable. I reached for my badge to check system access. The light blinked red. No chime, no soft unlock, just the subtle resistance of a door that no longer opened for me. The screensaver on my monitor had shifted to the new company logo. I let it play. Blue lines gliding across a clean white field forming the shape of a globe. Once after a minor milestone, Brandon had turned to me in the hallway. "Just do the parts you're good at," he'd said. "We'll handle the rest." He hadn't waited for a response. He never needed one. I opened my archive folder and scrolled to the original Eastbridge proposal. At the bottom of page 17 was my name, still intact, in a smaller font. I traced the cursor over it. My initials faint in the metadata. There was no alert when I closed the file, no prompt asking if I wanted to save changes. I didn't. They already had. I've found that walking away doesn't require a door to close. Just the decision not to stand inside anymore. I arrived before the lights came on. The carpet still smelled faintly of last night's vacuuming, and the copier hadn't warmed. No one looked up when I passed. I unlocked the drawer one final time. The folders inside were labeled in my handwriting ink, softened from months of reuse. I sorted them into 3 stacks fulfilled pending compromised. I placed the bundle marked Legal Review on Karen Blake's desk, just left of her photo frame, where her daughter wore a paper crown and a chocolate mustache. There was no announcement, no farewell lunch, no message titled "Moving On." As I cleared my desktop, I paused at the mug with the chipped rim. I left it behind. Brandon would probably replace everything anyway. He liked new things. He liked his name engraved. "Just be realistic," my sister once told me over dry chicken and a table too crowded for elbows. Not "everyone wants you in the picture." I hadn't replied. I passed the mashed potatoes instead. On my way out, I glanced through the glass wall of Brandon's office. His new nameplate gleamed against the frosted panel. The chair still sat too high, the lumbar support unadjusted. A printout of a pie chart I'd once coloured in navy and grey lay folded on the floor. At the cafe down the block, I ordered tea and took a seat near the back. No laptop, no planner, just the mug, plain and too hot to drink. I watched as condensation bloomed on the inside of the window, then faded. A rhythm I didn't have to manage. Later, I sent one email. No body text, no subject line, just an attachment, a timeline of all documented transfer dates on the Eastbridge project file stamped and logged. Recipient Eric Langston. I didn't follow up. I didn't CC anyone. I knew he'd understand. I opened my phone, selected Block Domain, and tapped Confirm without rereading. On the edge of a napkin, I wrote down 3 town names. All had bus stations. One had a library. My badge still rested in my coat pocket. I didn't throw it away. I just left it there between a receipt and an old cough drop wrapper pressed flat by forgetting. I've heard people say silence is passive, but silence when chosen becomes a wall no one can climb. I never realized how many decisions I made just to be seen. The room I rented had no lock on the closet, no drawers that slid all the way in. The floor creaked in odd places. The window faced a cluster of pine trees, tall and indifferent. The owner handed me the keys without asking where I'd come from or how long I planned to stay. That silence felt deliberate, almost like a gift. At the flea market, I found a second-hand teapot. Ceramic, pale green, a chip near the spout. I liked how it felt in my hands, sturdy, a little uneven. I bought a leather-bound notebook with scuffed edges, the kind of thing I might have once used to plan quarterly reviews. Now I used it to write down things I didn't need to remember. The first entry was only 6 words. I can still hear the wind. I didn't unpack much. A coat, a pair of flat shoes, one shirt that had faded around the collar, but still fit in a way that made me feel grounded. I folded everything into neat stacks. There wasn't much to hide anymore. I started walking each morning. The trail around the lake curved quietly through the trees. I passed the same bench, the same fallen log, the same sign, warning about low branches. The stillness didn't press in. It opened. At the library, I offered to sort the donation shelf. No one asked for my qualifications. The woman behind the desk glanced at my hands, nodded once, and pointed to the cart. "People usually leave things without names," she said. Then she returned to her crossword. I organized paperbacks by color instead of genre. I wasn't sure it mattered. My phone stayed off most days. When I turned it on briefly, I saw a voicemail from an unknown number. I deleted it without listening. My mother used to say, "You think disappearing is noble, but it's really just avoiding disappointment." She said it while washing dishes, not looking up. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. No one here recognized me. No one brought up strategy models or slide decks or the way I used to tuck my badge into my coat like a habit I couldn't break. For the first time, that anonymity didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the space left behind after a painting is removed, blank, quiet, full of possibility. Some people wait to be invited back. I think I just stopped waiting. People rarely come back for you. They come back for what you used to hold. The email from Amanda arrived just before noon. I hadn't given her my new address, but the subject line found its way through upcoming event. Your presence would mean a lot. There was no greeting, just a single paragraph outlining the company's international strategy showcase. We'd love to list you as an honorary advisor. It would help reinforce continuity. The phrase sat oddly between flattery and function. Hours later, another message followed. None of this was personal. I hope you'll consider participating, for the sake of what we built. Douglas had never needed many words. He'd built his career on what wasn't said. A few days passed before the envelope arrived. Thick paper, wax seal, return address in bold sans serif, inside an invitation to appear at the event. No speaking role, no formal acknowledgement. A line at the bottom read, "Name subject to availability." The signature wasn't Douglas's. It was Brandon's. Sharp, rushed, overly confident. The kind of stroke that forgets it might be printed next to others. I set the envelope beside my teacup, watching the edge curl under the heat. There was a time I would have ironed it. Flat, filed it with the others, rehearsed my 3-line response. Now, I let the paper warp. In the reading room at the library, I came across a trade publication someone had left folded open. A single column near the bottom caught my eye. Eastbridge Global has not confirmed ongoing engagement with Hartman Group. The sentence was followed by an asterisk. I didn't need to read the footnote. A woman next to me marked a recipe with a paperclip. "You look familiar," she said. I smiled without answering. Familiarity doesn't require truth. My father once told me over a dry turkey sandwich, people only invite you back when they realize you took the balance with you. He wasn't talking about work, but I understood the shape of what he meant. The envelope remained on my table for days unopened. I didn't return it. I didn't frame it. I didn't even move it when I wiped the surface clean. Sometimes it's useful to leave a thing untouched, not to remember what it was, but to remind yourself of what it no longer has the power to be. There's a difference between starting over and starting differently. The library offered a weekly workshop on practical writing resumes, cover letters, emails that didn't sound like begging. I volunteered to lead it. No credentials were asked. I brought my own pens. The whiteboard squeaked a little when I wrote, and the markers dried too quickly. No one cared. A teenager wanted help crafting a sentence that didn't sound like desperation. I told her clarity was enough. She underlined the word twice. On Thursday, a woman in her 70s asked how to budget her pension. We drew columns on printer paper. Groceries, rent, incidentals. She frowned at the numbers, then laughed. You're too calm to have come from anything fast-paced. I didn't correct her. That night I opened my old resume and typed a new version from scratch. I didn't plan to send it. I wanted to see if I remembered the shape of my own story. The first line read, "Knows how to set limits." I saved the file, but didn't name it. Rebecca's email arrived with the usual polish. "Just checking in. Are you still aligned with your previous team?" I replied, with a single emoji, a teapot. No further questions followed. Once at a family dinner, my aunt set her fork down and looked across the table. "You always make things harder than they need to be." No one disagreed. I had passed the salt before she asked. "I don't explain things now, not out of secrecy, but because I've learned that answers often invite more edits than understanding." In the evenings, I opened my leather notebook and began rewriting contract frameworks from memory. Not to propose anything, just to remember the order in which things used to make sense. There was a rhythm to clean formatting, a kind of quiet clarity in watching terms align. I listed timelines and contingencies, risks and reversals. I didn't include names. I didn't need them anymore. The coat I wore most days had a fraying seam near the wrist. I stitched it myself uneven but secure. Some things don't have to look perfect to hold. Someone asked if I ever missed the old pace. I said I liked having space to think between words. Growth doesn't always sound like progress. Sometimes it sounds like not replying. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice steady low enough. I haven't gone back. Not because I'm afraid to return, but because I'm no longer looking for the door. Closure rarely arrives with ceremony. Sometimes it's a folded document and a seal pressed flat by the back of a spoon. I packed the envelope slowly. The original Eastbridge contract, my handwriting still faint in the margins, sat at the top. Beneath it, a few internal memos that never left my desk drawer. Not the dramatic kind. Just unfinished notes, observations, timestamps. I added the old badge. The lamination had started to peel the barcode barely legible. The edges curled slightly from where it had once lived, wedged behind my phone case. I pressed it between 2 pages to keep it from bending. There was no return address, no initials on the wax. I pressed it down, held it steady, let it cool without checking the imprint. The envelope didn't need to be recognized. It only needed to arrive. Once, while clearing my childhood closet, my mother held up an old trophy and said, "You've always had trouble letting things go, even the ones that meant very little." She placed it back on the shelf without looking at me. I mailed the envelope to Eric Langston's office. No message, no explanation. The weight of the thing was enough. That same morning, I called the number listed under Human Resources. The woman who answered introduced herself as Abigail. I gave my name, my employee ID, the department I no longer worked in. I'd like to be removed from all internal records, I said. There was a pause. You're not listed on our current roster. Her tone didn't change. Not indifferent, just practiced. I thanked her and hung up before she offered anything else. There was no post, no draft folder, no final sentiment. I didn't write about it. I didn't save a copy. I didn't take a photo of the sealed envelope, like proof of something brave. It wasn't bravery. It was gravity finding its way back to stillness. In the afternoon, I walked the path behind the cabin. The wooden bridge creaked under my feet. My coat brushed the railing soft from wear. No one called me by a title. No one expected a statement. There was no glass office waiting, no inbox accumulating questions. The wind moved across the trees without resistance. I let it pass through me. Some things you return not to make a point, but to make space. I don't need a summary to remember who I am. The kettle whistled just enough to remind me I hadn't forgotten how to listen. I poured the water slowly, watching it darken the tea leaves in loose spirals. The chipped glaze on the rim had started to wear smooth where my fingers always rested. A library book lay open beside a pressed daisy I had found along the edge of the lake. Its stem had curled in the drying, but the petals stayed intact. I didn't bookmark the page. I liked returning by instinct. I set a shallow bowl beside the door. The cat had come again, careful and silent, leaving paw prints in the dust and a single orange hair on the step. We didn't speak. A knock interrupted the quiet. A boy with scuffed shoes handed me 3 stapled pages. His essay on personal boundaries was uneven, but he had tried. You wrote like you believed it, I told him. He nodded and ran off before I could say more. At the bookstore, the man behind the counter handed me a worn paperback. Not well known, he said, but honest. I didn't read the title. I took it anyway. My father once looked at me across a dinner I hadn't finished and said, "You don't have to keep proving you're right. Most people aren't listening." Then he folded his napkin and left the room. I didn't follow. That night, I sorted the loose pages in my notebook. Some were drafts, others unfinished thoughts. I didn't arrange them. I didn't try to make them a whole. I touched the edge of each one like they were small things I had earned the right to keep. There were no emails, no voicemails, no calendar reminders blinking red. No one used my name in a panel discussion. No one printed it in a newsletter. No one mentioned what I used to be in a list of alumni accomplishments. But on the last page of the notebook, I had written a single line in my own hand. I choose to exist without permission. It wasn't bold. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It wasn't even meant to be remembered. But it was enough.